I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, President-elect Joe Biden formally introducing key members of his economic team to help overcome the financial fallout brought on by the coronavirus pandemic. Robert Wolf, former Obama economic advisor and Fox News contributor and founding editor of the Washington Free Beacon, Matthew Continetti, discuss Mr. Biden's nominees and the upcoming Senate runoffs in Georgia. The assassination of Iran's top nuclear scientist, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, once again setting the Middle East on edge, reigniting tensions. Who is responsible, and how will this affect the relationship between Washington and Tehran? Dr. Jim Walsh, an expert in international security and a research associate at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Security Studies program, joins the rundown to share his insight, plus commentary from Jimmy Fallon, host of Fox Across America. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Jerry Willis.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Shannon Bream, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, December 2nd, 2020. I'm Lisa Brady. The president-elect picks an economic team that has their work cut out for them, which could include raising taxes.
1 in 6 small businesses have closed. You have states that can't fund the services needed. We have so many things we need to do, and I actually think it's like a patriotic tax.
I'm Dave Anthony. Who killed Iran's top nuclear scientist? There are several theories and possible motives.
Assassinating him at this point might somehow scramble the politics for new President Biden entering into office. His stated goal is to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal.
And I'm Jimmy Fallon. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
President-elect Joe Biden is building the team he says can lead the U.S. out of a pandemic-driven recession.
We're going to create a recovery for everybody, for all. We're going to get this economy moving again.
On Tuesday, formally introducing an economic team he hopes will be led by Janet Yellen. She was the first woman to be Fed chief and would be the first woman to serve as Treasury Secretary.
Out of our collective pain as a nation, we will find collective purpose to control the pandemic and build our economy back better than before.
There is also a shared message of advancing racial equality and diversity on the team itself. Economist Cecilia Rouse would be the first African-American to chair the Council of Economic Advisors, or CEA, and Neera, Tanden, the first woman of color and South Asian American to serve as director of the Office of Management and Budget.
I'm especially proud to work alongside leaders who understand that budgets are not abstractions. They are a reflection of our values. They touch our lives in profound ways.
Her parents are from India, and Tanden talks about wanting everyone to have the fair chance her mom got, using the safety net of food stamps and public housing while raising her kids alone for a time. Tanden's critics are focusing on her later years as an aide to Hillary Clinton and outspoken president of the liberal Center for American Progress, with a history of political tweets already raising concern about a Senate confirmation vote. Jared Bernstein, who served as Biden's chief economist when he was vice president, would also serve on the Council of Economic Advisors.
I think thus far he's put a great experienced team together, and I put experience with a capital E.
Robert Wolf is a former economic advisor to President Obama, CEO of 32 Advisors, and a Fox News contributor.
I think when you look at his economic team and you look at his national security team, it's clear that he wanted people who had experience, who were not new to Washington, who were not new to, in some ways, the role, you could almost argue, when you look at, certainly, former Fed chair Janet Yellen and coming in as Treasury Secretary. So I think he's really has a great cabinet, and I think that he needs a great cabinet because we have the bookends being the pandemic and the need for an economic recovery. And both of those things are with an incredible sense of urgency, Lisa.
But in terms of the experience, that he's tapping into? I mean, there has been some criticism that it's starting to look kind of like a reboot of the Obama administration. I mean, could that end up turning some people off?
If you look at the Obama administration when they came in, we were losing 800,000 jobs a month. And if you look at where he brought this economic recovery to, we had a robust stock market. We had robust jobs. We were averaging 225,000 private sector job gains a month, which is a higher average than the 3-year period before COVID of President Trump. So as someone who is a fan of the Obama administration, I'm all for us having some of the people that had experience. That being said, it's very different than where we were in 2008 when the Obama team came in and were inaugurated in 2009. Because this is not a financial recession. This is not based on financial banks' leverage in the system. This economic recession was brought upon by the pandemic.
Republicans are raising concern about this economic team, assuming everyone, is confirmed and put in place, possibly raising taxes, reimposing more regulation, things that could stifle the rebound of an economy that has been slammed by the pandemic. Are you concerned at all about that? I mean, is it the wrong time to be raising taxes?
I think a couple things. One, we don't know whether tax reform will or will not happen because it actually starts with who's running the Senate. If the GOP continues to have a majority in the Senate and win Georgia, then the idea of Joe Biden's structural tax reform is highly unlikely. That being said, I think there's a need for tax reform. Lisa, after every war, literally since 1776, the country has followed with taxes to pay for the war. This pandemic is a war. How are we going to pay for all the things that we need to do? 1 in 6 small businesses have closed. You have states that can't fund the services needed. We have so many things we need to do. And I actually think it's like a patriotic tax. The wealthiest people in the country who have benefited the most, are going to have to give a little more. And as one of those, I'm okay with that.
What about the possibility of personalities getting in the way or distracting from the agenda? And I ask that with the potential budget chief, Neera Tanden, in mind, because she's been getting some early pushback from both sides of the aisle. Why is she such a lightning rod? And does she deserve that bipartisan criticism?
I think that a couple things. During the Hillary Clinton-Bernie race that took place in 2015 and 16, she was a passionate Clinton supporter, and she, was very outspoken in defending Hillary versus Bernie and making sure people knew the differences. So, yeah, there's some people on, I would say, the populist left that have issues with maybe how Neera handled that during that situation. But that's politics. I mean, politics at times have sharp elbows and you need to get the puck out of the corner. I think with respect to how she handled some Senate Republicans that are upset about Twitter, I mean, honestly, if we're not going to confirm someone because, they were called, lazy someone or lying someone on Twitter versus what this president has said on Twitter, I mean, you've got to be kidding me.
The media gets accused by Republicans, at least, of fawning over the president-elect. You could use as a case in point his all-female communications team when President Trump had a lot of women in those roles as well. Is this a honeymoon for Biden? Is he going to face even a fraction of the same scrutiny going forward that President Trump did?
Well, I don't think, I'm a Fox contributor. You're on Fox. I don't think Fox has given him a free pass. So, in my opinion, the media, I like to think, is going to be constructively challenging the president-elect on his cabinet picks, on his policies. And I guarantee President-elect won't call them the enemy of the state. he won't lie 20,000 times in a 3-year period. So I feel pretty good that the relationship is going to be constructively challenging, but one of respect, which this administration didn't handle that way at all.
Republicans, however, are expecting a double standard from the media.
Oh, of course, yeah. Well, I mean, all the stories we've been seeing about Joe Biden's pets.
Matthew Continetti is founding editor of the Free Beacon.
Stories about, where he'll be eating out, the celebrations of the all-female media team. We've just had we still have a female press secretary right now, and McEnany, and we had one before her, two before her, actually, with Grissom and Huckabee. The double standard will be there, but it hasn't stopped Republican victories in the past, and I don't expect it to stop it now. The real question is, will Republicans find a way to shoot themselves in the foot, which they also have had a tendency to do in the past?
The overriding question is whether the Biden team will be able to build back better, or at least better than the Obama recovery from the financial crisis, which Republicans criticize as the slowest since the Great Depression.
Well, a lot depends on what these new choices for Biden's economic team do once they find themselves in power next year. Certainly the markets liked the announcement that Janet Yellen would be Biden's nominee for the Secretary of the Treasury. I think the general response from markets has been positive because she's seen as a steady hand, someone who obviously has a long resume. But once the Biden administration comes into office, they're going to have to face real choices about the level of taxes, spending, and regulation they want to impose on the country. And if they grow government too big, if they restrict economic activity through lockdowns, for example, or if they repeal the entirety of the Trump tax cut, which they have promised to do, there could be negative economic consequences.
I know one of the arguments that's made frequently is that, well, if Biden raises taxes, it's not going to hit people under $400,000, and they seem to not draw the parallel between not raising taxes on those under a certain income, but repealing the Trump tax cuts. And I guess it's because they always say that those tax cuts benefited mainly the wealthy. So how do you sort of get those arguments in line, if you will?
Well, I think a lot of nonpartisan studies have shown that everybody received benefit from the Trump tax cut. Probably the larger benefits went to people with larger incomes. Of course, they pay more in taxes, so it makes sense that they would get a bigger boost. Nonetheless, I think the problem for the Biden administration is they'd be coming into office at a time when most Americans had a generally positive view of the Trump economy, and whether that was through the tax cut, which was really his signature domestic accomplishment, or whether that was through just pausing the regulation and also getting rid of some of the more onerous regulations that Barack Obama announced in the last year of his presidency, whether that was through restricting immigration, to be honest. There's some data which suggests that if you restrict low-skilled immigration, then that's going to push up wages among low-wage workers. And the thing about the Trump boom is that it helped everybody, unlike, say, the Obama recovery, where most of the gains went to people who were already well off.
How much of an impact could Biden's early picks, his early steps that he's made so far, have on those upcoming Senate races in Georgia?
Well, I actually think what's happening on Capitol Hill in terms of COVID relief is going to have a much bigger impact on the special elections in Georgia. But I think more important will be the issue of not only the virus, of relief for the virus, but also the idea of, who do you want to control the United States Senate? Do you want to allow the Democrats to have basically control with Vice President-elect Harris's tie-breaking vote that would free them up to do a lot of things, including possibly eliminating the filibuster and changing the rules of the game to help them and to help liberal priorities, or not?
Matthew Continetti, founding editor of the Free Beacon, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
This is Jimmy Fallon with your Fox News commentary coming up.
It's a whodunit. The assassination of Iran's top nuclear scientist months after a top general was killed in a U.S. drone strike.
If you're working at the higher reaches of the Iranian government's or their military or their terrorist organization, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, I think you probably don't want to be walking under any ladders anytime soon.
Republican Senator Tom Cotton. Now, unlike the January attack in Iraq that took out General Qasem Soleimani, who the U.S. called a terrorist, no one is taking credit for killing Mohsen Fakhrizadeh last week. Now, he is considered the father of Iran's nuclear program. Iran blames Israel and suggests Saudi Arabia and the U.S. may be involved in a conspiracy and is vowing revenge. A concern to Democratic Congressman John Garamendi, who told Fox,
"My guess is it'll be something that'll be pinpointed. It might very well be in the diplomatic area, not in the military area."
So what does this all mean for Iran's nuclear program?
Well, I think it means different things at different levels.
Jim Walsh is a Middle East and nuclear expert, senior research associate at MIT's Security Studies program.
Iran had an active nuclear weapons program beginning in the late 1990s and then was halted in 2003. So, and then they built a civilian nuclear establishment around that. And so taking out one person might not be as important in a big organization as it would be in a smaller organization. But, it all depends on who replaces them. So I think it's an open question as to what impact it will have on the program itself. But I think most experts will imagine that it'll just more or less continue, as it is.
All right. What about the next level then? Yeah.
Yeah. The next level then is the political level. There is the notion that doing this, assassinating him at this point, might somehow scramble the politics for new President Biden entering into office, who his stated goal is to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal, the agreement that President Trump had withdrawn, and his plan is to re-enter, and there's some thinking that at a political level, the impact might be to make rejoining that more complicated, that the Iranians will be mad and not want to play ball, or that there would be other consequences.
Okay, now if that's the case, if that is a goal behind this, there have been some people claiming that the U.S. had to be involved, that the Trump administration would have to be involved. I mean, there was this report in November that President Trump had to be talked out of trying to take military action against Iran. So where do you stand on that?
I'm in the absence of any facts, I'm pretty open-minded here. So it seems to me perfectly plausible that Israel by themselves and without notification would have carried it out on their own. The reason I say that is that it's well established that for decades, going back even to the 1960s, Israeli intelligence has assassinated weapons scientists in other countries, from Egypt to Iraq and in Iran as well. So, Israel seems like a pretty good bet, but they may have told the U.S. or they might not have told the U.S. I'm open on that. And it's also conceivable that the president asked Israel to carry out this operation. That he wanted to take, if he wasn't going to be able to use airstrikes or some other method, wanted to impose pressure or cost on Iran, and thought that Israel doing it might be a better way to go about it. I think that's a possibility. I doubt that the U.S. would have been directly, operationally involved. But again, these things are hard to know when it's all behind closed doors.
Let's go into the Iran nuclear program as it is now. After the U.S. pulled out of that international deal, there was movement for Iran to breach parts of that deal, correct?
Its initial reaction was to just lay low and be quiet and try to ride this thing out. And the president increasingly pursued what he called the maximum pressure policy, which means, sanction after sanction, punishment after punishment. So after a while, Iran found a new strategy, which was it was going to start to push back and respond. What they did was sort of selectively break some of their commitments. So they produced more low-enriched uranium than they were supposed to. And they did, they had more heavy water than they agreed to. So at the margins, they started to take steps to sort of signal that, hey, cut this out or we're going to really fully restart the program.
Okay, back up 1 second. For 1 second, for people who, you have a great knowledge of what it takes to build a nuclear weapon. Most of us do not. So when you talk about uranium enrichment, what exactly is that?
You cannot make a nuclear weapon from low-enriched uranium. Really, what you use low-enriched uranium for is a fuel for a nuclear power plant to produce nuclear energy and electricity. To make a bomb, you need uranium that's enriched not to 3 or 5%, but closer to 80 or 90%. And the same box that produces 3% enriched fuel is the same box or centrifuge that would produce the bomb fuel if you just kept enriching and enriching and enriching and enriching. So what they have right now, they cannot make, they cannot make a bomb with what they have. They'd have to take what they have now and then re-enrich it to a higher level, and they'd have to kick out all the inspectors, and then they'd have to, regen up some sort of manufacturing process. And so we're some distance from that. In basic terms, yes, they have more material than they did at the beginning of the agreement, but it's actually, that amount is actually less than they had before the agreement started. In other words, they had a bunch of stuff, then they entered the agreement, then they cut it all down, then they've let it grow a little, but they still have less than they did prior to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. So that's where we're at now. My own guess, based on talking to Iranian officials, which I do frequently, and to others in the region, for all those noise and drama, my guess is that Iran would rejoin the nuclear agreement and go back into full compliance, and clean up this other sort of stuff at the margins.
Okay.
They would go back into full compliance if we do. But the clock is ticking here. There's not going to be a lot of time to do that, but I sense that's where both parties are at right now.
Back to that 2015 international nuclear deal. President Obama said then,
"We have achieved a detailed arrangement that permanently prohibits Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. It cuts off all of Iran's pathways to a bomb."
3 years later, President Trump pulled the U.S. out, calling it a horrible deal.
Not only does the deal fail to halt Iran's nuclear ambitions, but it also fails to address the regime's development of ballistic missiles that could deliver nuclear warheads.
But Jim Walsh still thinks it's a good agreement.
No agreement is ever perfect, but this agreement was the strongest ever non-proliferation, multilateral, which means to say lots of different countries together in one agreement rather than like two countries. It's the strongest multilateral non-proliferation agreement ever negotiated. Iran is the most inspected country in the world. No country has the level of intrusive inspection, electronic monitoring, inspector visits, reporting that Iran does. And by the way, Iran, because of who it is and the bad things it's done, it is the most watched country in the world. The U.S. intelligence community, the Israeli intelligence community, the Saudi, the Russian, everyone has eyes on Iran.
That said, is it true that there are still some sites they don't let inspectors into?
Oh, sure, because no country is going to listen. We don't let people just show up at the Pentagon or at secret military sites in the U.S. and let international inspectors in. And if we did that, everyone would scream bloody murder. The IAEA has a right to inspect any facility, military or not, if it has reason to suspect that there's a violation. And it has inspected military facilities, and it has gotten to where it wants to go. It's still, now there's one issue left over from about 2 years ago where they found contaminated particles at a facility where there should not have been contaminated particles, and they're still arguing about that. But in the main, the agency does not report problems with access, and there's no intelligence community in any country, but obviously, most importantly, there's no U.S. intelligence view that Iran has cheated or restarted its nuclear weapons program.
Okay.
Just not the case.
But, again, part of the criticism is that the deal doesn't prevent it. And in fact, it would allow it within 15 years, that the idea was it would delay Iran. Is that true?
No, it's not true. Now, the opening paragraph of the agreement says Iran commits not to acquiring nuclear weapons and is under its nuclear nonproliferation treaty obligations, which are in perpetuity forever. Some of the regulations do come off at a 10-year mark, at a 15-year mark, and then some of the regulations and restrictions apply forever. It in no way allows Iran to pursue a nuclear weapon. Iran, under this agreement and the other obligations it's already taken on, it would be completely illegal for it to pursue or try to get a nuclear weapon. Now, if they do that, the question is how to catch them. And that's why having people on the ground doing inspections is better than not having an agreement where people aren't on the ground and doing inspections.
Okay, now let's get to President-elect Biden, and as you talked about, his plan to re-enter that deal if he can once he takes office. You say you talked to these Iranian officials. Do they want that? Are they pushing for that? Even with this assassination, do they still want that?
That's a great question, Dave. And you know what? They're a deeply divided society like we're a deeply divided society. I mean, obviously there are a lot of differences here, but they've got reformists and hardliners and clerics, and they're all fighting each other. Sometimes these are fights over ideology. Sometimes they're fights over, plain old political power. But here's the deal. Rouhani, their president, is the guy who negotiated the agreement. He's only in office for another 6 months because they have an election coming this summer. He would like to get back into the agreement that he signed and leave office with some sort of sense of accomplishment and legitimacy, and also to get some sanctions relief. But his political opponents in the Revolutionary Guard, hardliners in their legislature, they, of course, have hopped all over this assassination and are, they are not as enthusiastic about rejoining the deal because they see it as in their political interest, with an election coming up, to take a harder line. So that's what we're looking at right now.
So it's uncertain, and if Iran retaliates, the U.S. may not be able to get back in right away, right?
Exactly. My own sense is Iran won't do that, and I thought there was a clue in one of their recent statements after the assassination. They said they will retaliate at the appropriate time, or language to that effect. And that, I think, tells me that they realize that they go and retaliate tomorrow, that's going to make, everything complicated, if not impossible, going forward. So my guess is they will retaliate, but they'll take their time doing it.
Certainly a lot of uncertainty. Jim Walsh, thank you very much. Senior Research Associate, MIT Security Studies Program. We appreciate you joining us on the podcast.
Thanks, Dave. It was great.
New from the Fox News Podcasts Network.
My name is Kennedy, and welcome to my podcast, which will, I humbly say, single-handedly save the world. You're welcome.
It's Kennedy Saves the World. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Jimmy Fallon.
What's on your mind?
So Joe and Jill Biden are expected to get a cat in the White House to go along with their German Shepherds, Major and Scout. They're naming the cat Whatchamacallit. So Joe always calls it by the right name, which is not true. The reason this is making news is because Donald Trump was the first president in a generation who didn't have any pets in the White House. The Obamas had dogs, the Bushes had dogs, and Bill Clinton had a dog and a cat, as well as Hillary's dog, which never spoke without charging you a speaking fee. But back to the Bidens, who got 100 syrupy sweet write-ups this weekend about a cat they don't even own yet. The cat coverage is a far cry from the relentless attacks the media waged against Donald Trump on his way into the White House. Think about it. When Trump was president-elect, the media chased Russian collusion stories like a laser pointer. They ran one anonymously sourced bombshell after another with no regard for whether or not it was true. And to be clear, I've got nothing against Joe Biden getting a cat, but if the media wants to maintain any pretense of objectivity, they should ask Biden some tough questions too. And if they can't do that, they should hit the pause button on the cat stories. Check out Fox News Radio with Jimmy Fallon weekdays from noon to 3 on Fox News Radio and foxnewsradio.com.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. Fox News Radio On Demand on the Fox News app. Download the app and just click listen. When you swipe left, you can listen to your favorite Fox News talk shows live. Swipe right for the latest Fox News Radio newscasts on demand. Fox News Radio on the Fox News app. Download it today.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.